Hello and welcome back to another slow storytelling journey before sleep. Tonight we will travel to a cold lake in North America, a place where the surface of the water seems peaceful, yet beneath it lies layer upon layer of memory, deeper than most people imagine. This is Lake Champlain, a body of water tied to stories of Champ, the mysterious lake monster, to the famous Mansi photograph, to legends of giant serpents told by indigenous peoples, and even to real traces left behind from the Ice Age. Before we begin, take a moment to relax your shoulders, let your breathing soften, and if you would like, leave a comment telling us where you are listening from and what time it is where you are right now. Perhaps you are in a quiet room at midnight in a city whose lights have just begun to dim, or somewhere very far away, where beyond the window there is only wind and darkness. But this is not a story meant to rush into claiming that a monster is real. This is a slow journey through mist, across the surface of the water, through ancient mud, past buried bones, and toward an ancient fish that still moves silently along the bottom of the lake like a breathing fossil. Perhaps the most frightening thing is not a shadow rising in the middle of the water. Perhaps what keeps human beings unable to look away from a deep lake is the feeling that beneath that silent surface, some part of the past has still not agreed to sleep. So, lie down, listen slowly, and step with us into the story of Mansi, the living fossil beneath the frozen lake. There are some lakes that, when seen from far away, seem to hide nothing but light. They lie still beneath the sky, reflecting clouds, reflecting forests, reflecting the small houses nestled along their shores, so peaceful that people can almost believe every secret has already sunk too deep to trouble the world above. And yet, it is in places that seem the quietest that the human imagination begins to awaken. A strange ripple, a passing shadow, a shape that does not match anything we already know. Just that much is enough to turn an ordinary surface of water into a doorway leading down into a very different realm. Lake Champlain is one of those places. The lake stretches between the green lands of Vermont and New York, reaching northward toward the Canadian border, vast, cold, and far deeper than its gentle appearance suggests. On beautiful days, its surface can be blue and bright, like an enormous sheet of glass where small boats pass by and leave behind soft trails of waves. But when the sky turns gray, when the wind moves across the distant mountains, when the water darkens beneath low clouds, Lake Champlain takes on something quiet and difficult to read. A person standing on the shore can see the waves but not the bottom. They can see the light on the surface, but they cannot know what may be moving in the depths below. Tonight's story does not begin with a roar, nor with a ship being dragged beneath the water, nor with an ancient curse echoing through a dark forest. It begins with a very ordinary moment. On a summer day in 1977, when a woman named Mansi and her family were at Lake Champlain, the scene before her did not resemble anything mysterious. It was a family outing, a stop beside the water, an ordinary slice of life, the kind thousands of other families had experienced beside great lakes. Children, adults, grassy shore sunlight, the open surface of the water, and the familiar lightness of a day spent away from the usual rhythm of everyday life. Then on the surface of the lake, something appeared. According to later accounts, it was not a boat, nor did it look like a person swimming. It did not resemble any familiar animal that an ordinary person could easily name. From a distance, the shape rose above the water with a curved part of its body, a neck-like form lifting upward, as if some large object had just emerged from the silent depths. Everything happened very quickly, so quickly that there was no time to examine it, no time to move closer, no time to turn surprise into a clear conclusion. There were only a few seconds, a strange moment on the water, and the deeply human instinct, when faced with something impossible to explain, to raise a camera. A photograph was taken, that was all, but sometimes a photograph can live longer than the moment that created it. It does not need to speak, it only needs to exist, slightly blurred, slightly distant, slightly uncertain, and it is precisely that uncertainty that makes people keep looking. The photograph Sandra Mansi took that day later became one of the most famous images connected to Champ, the name often given to the mysterious creature said to live in Lake Champlain. In the photograph, people see a dark shape rising on the surface of the lake, part of a body or neck curving upward in the water, with the flat lake and distant shoreline behind it. It is not clear enough for an immediate conclusion, but it is also not so vague that people can easily dismiss it. Perhaps that is exactly why the photograph became so powerful. If it had been too clear, the story might have ended quickly. People would have known what it was: an animal, a log, a drifting object, a prank, or a real creature. But the Mansi photograph does not give the viewer that certainty. It stands in between. It leaves a space wide enough for doubt and deep enough for imagination. And inside that space, a modern legend begins to take a clearer shape. Try to imagine holding that photograph in your hands, not on a phone screen, not inside an analytical article, but as an old printed photograph where the colors carry the breath of time. You look at the surface of the lake. You see a dark curve. You wonder if it is a tree trunk. Why is it standing like that? If it is an ordinary animal, what animal has that shape? If it is only a wave, why does it create the feeling of a body, a neck, a presence? The longer you look, the more you feel that you are not merely looking at a photograph. You are looking into the question that the photograph opens. But a photograph is never just something lying on paper. It carries with it the person who took it, the circumstances, the memory, the account, the silence, and everything that cannot be fully verified after the moment has passed. In the case of Mansi, those questions make the story even more complicated. The photograph was taken in an unexpected moment. The object disappeared. The distance, the size, the exact location, the light, the angle of view, all became pieces that are difficult to fit back together perfectly. Time passed and human memory drifted with it, not necessarily because anyone deliberately changed the story, but because memory itself is another kind of water. It reflects, trembles, and sometimes distorts what once happened. That is why the Mansi photograph should not be told as final proof. It should be told as a starting point. It does not close the door of mystery, but opens it. It does not force the listener to immediately believe that a monster lives beneath the lake. It simply places us in the same position as the witness standing before something strange for only a few brief seconds, not close enough to understand, not distant enough to forget. And perhaps that very feeling is what has allowed the story to survive for so long. After the photograph became known to the public, it quickly stepped out of the private life of one family and entered the imagination of many people. Those who believed in Champ saw in it a rare sign, a moment when the lake accidentally revealed its secret resident. Skeptics saw instead a visual puzzle, a natural object misunderstood, or a single frame without enough data to prove anything at all. Between those two sides, the photograph continued to live. It was reprinted, enlarged, analyzed, mentioned in stories about lake monsters, and each time it appeared it made people lean a little closer, as if a few more seconds of looking might cause the truth to reveal itself. But the truth is not that easy. Water is not like land. On land, footprints may remain in mud. Branches may break, fur bones drag marks, all have a chance to become evidence. But a lake surface is different. Water closes immediately after something passes through. Waves spread, then disappear. Light changes from minute to minute. A shadow may appear, transform, then dissolve back into the water as if it had never existed. That is why stories about lake creatures always carry a particular kind of uncertainty. They do not leave much for people to hold in their hands. They leave behind a feeling. For a storyteller, this is where one must move carefully. If we exaggerate too much, the story becomes a claim without foundation. But if we dismiss it too coldly from the beginning, we lose the very thing that draws human beings into mysteries like this. The Mansi photograph is memorable not because it proves everything. It is memorable because it shows us how one small moment can make an entire lake feel different in the imagination. Before the photograph, Lake Champlain already had its stories. But after that photograph, many people began to look at the lake with new eyes, slower, more suspicious, and perhaps also more dreamlike. Imagine someone standing on the shore after hearing about the Mansi photograph. The wind moves across the water. Far away, a diving bird vanishes and rises again somewhere else. A dark log drifts by one end, lifting above the waves for a few seconds. A group of large fish stirs gently beneath the surface, leaving widening circles behind. If that person had never heard the story, perhaps everything would be nothing more than an ordinary scene in nature. But once the story is already in their mind, the lake is no longer completely silent. Every small movement has the possibility of becoming a signal. Every dark patch of water seems to be holding back a breath. That is the strange power of legend when it meets an image. A spoken account may be seen as exaggeration. A memory may be doubted. But a photograph, even a vague one, still creates the feeling that we are standing closer to the truth. It gives the viewer something to hold on to. A curve, a black shadow, a frozen moment. And from there, the human mind does the rest. It connects the gaps, builds the size, imagines the movement, and gives it life, intention, and secrecy. And yet it is precisely here that the Mansi story becomes more fascinating than an ordinary monster tale, because it does not only ask, what was that creature? It also asks, why do we want to know so badly? Why can a shadow on the surface of water make people debate for decades? Why does an ordinary lake in one person's eyes become a place hiding the unknown in another's? And why, in an age of machines, maps, depth-measuring devices, satellites, and modern science, are human beings still drawn towards stories in which something may be living quietly at the edge of what we understand? Perhaps it is because mysteries like Mansi give us the feeling that the world is still vast. Not vast only in terms of distance, but vast in the sense that it has not been fully explained. They remind us that there are places we see every day and yet still do not truly know. A lake can be measured, named, placed on a map, crossed by boats, but none of that completely removes its depth from the human mind. Beneath the water, everything seems slower, darker, older. Even an ordinary creature can become mysterious when only a very small part of it reveals itself. In the story of Sandra Mansi, perhaps the most moving thing is not whether the photograph was truly Champ or not. What is more moving is the moment when a human being encounters something she cannot name. That moment was very brief, but it created a long ripple. From one afternoon beside the lake, it entered newspapers, books, debates, television programs, museums, family conversations, and even evenings like this one. When we lie down, listen, and imagine that cold, distant surface of water once again. From a skeptical point of view, we could say a blurred photograph is not enough to prove a mysterious creature. That is true. But from the point of view of storytelling, we could also say a blurred photograph is sometimes enough to keep a question alive. And that question, when told in the right way, does not need to become a declaration. It only needs to keep leading us onward. From the quiet shore into the moment, Mansi raised her camera through the dark shape on the water and back to a very familiar feeling that all of us have known at some point. The feeling that we have just seen something but are not sure what it was. And perhaps that is exactly why the first chapter of this journey must begin here with the Mansi photograph. Not because it explains the entire mystery, but because it places us in the state we need in order to go deeper, curious, slow, cautious, and yet still open to the layers of story surrounding Lake Champlain. The lake in the photograph is not loud. It does not try to persuade. It simply holds a strange shape in silence, as if the water itself does not want to answer too quickly. Night falls over Lake Champlain. The last light slides away from the surface, and the distant shorelines slowly sink into blue-gray shadow. If you stood there long enough, you might hear the small waves touching stone, the wind passing through the trees, the call of a night bird somewhere in the darkness. Nothing appears. No long neck rises. No enormous body cuts through the water. There is only the lake, wide and deep, lying still beneath the sky. But after knowing about the Mansi photograph, that stillness no longer feels entirely the same. It feels like a story holding its breath, waiting to be told further. Before the name Champ ever appeared in newspapers, before the Mansi photograph made modern viewers lean closer to the surface of the water in search of a strange shape, Lake Champlain was already a place with a memory of its own. That lake did not begin to be mysterious in the 20th century. It had been mysterious long before then, in fog-covered mornings, in the sound of paddles tapping gently against the sides of canoes, in stories told beside the fire, when night had fallen deep, and the water beyond was nothing but a vast dark band lying between the trees. If we move far back in time, before the lakeside towns, before the docks, before the tourist roads, and the signs showing a friendly monster for visitors passing through the Lake Champlain region, was a world of forest water, cold wind, and natural pathways. The lake was not merely a beautiful view. It was a road. It was a source of life. It was a soft boundary between lands, a place where people traveled by canoe, fished, hunted, met, traded, and sometimes felt themselves becoming small before a power that did not fully belong to them. For the indigenous communities living around the lake, the water was not a lifeless surface. It had a character. It had seasons. At times it opened gently, carrying boats across like a pathway made of light. At other times, it turned violent, with wind rising from faraway waves striking stone, and the sky lowering as if it wished to touch the water. In winter, when ice covered the shallower areas, the lake became stranger still. Above was a silent white layer. Below were dark water, slow currents, fish mud stone, and depths the human eye could never reach. It was in a world like this that legends of giant water creatures easily found a place to live. A shadow passing beneath the surface. A long body rising and disappearing again. A strange sound in the early morning fog. To those who lived near the lake, such things were not simply products of imagination. They were a way of reading an environment that was both familiar and dangerous. For the lake sustained them, but it could also take lives. It gave fish passage and water, but it also held sudden winds, cold depths fog that made the shore vanish, and dark spaces where no one could know for certain what lay beneath. In the stories passed down about Lake Champlain, people often speak of indigenous legends about a large creature living in the water, sometimes described as a giant serpent, sometimes as a horned serpent, and sometimes simply as a powerful presence dwelling within the lake. Some local sources record the Abenaki name Gitaskog, associated with the image of a great serpent in the water. In other versions, we encounter different variations of the same ancient fascination. Beneath the deep surface of the water, there is a being that should not be disturbed. What matters is that we should not look at these stories too hastily through modern eyes. They are not scientific reports about an unconfirmed species, nor are they merely invented tales meant to frighten children. They belong to a deeper space between experience, memory, warning, and symbol. In many cultures, water serpents or lake monsters often appear in places where human beings depend on rivers and lakes, yet can never fully control them. Such figures can carry meanings of warning, sacredness, fear, respect, or simply a way for people to name the uneasiness they feel when standing before a body of water too vast to understand. Imagine an evening long ago on the shore of the lake. The forest darkens behind you. The fire burns low, thin smoke drifting through the cold air. Canoes have been pulled onto the shore, lying on their sides in the damp grass. Out there, the lake has nearly vanished into the night, yet people can still hear it breathing. The water strikes the rocks in a steady rhythm. The wind touches the treetops. Now and then, from the deeper darkness, a sound rises, impossible to name with certainty. A large fish, a water bird, a falling branch, or something else. In that moment, a story about the serpent beneath the lake is not merely a tale. It is the way the night takes shape. Stories like these often live for a very long time because they do not require one fixed form. Each storyteller may add a detail, remove a detail, change the color of the skin, the size, the sound, the action, but the core feeling remains the same. There is something beneath the water. It is larger than human beings. It does not appear at our command. It belonged to the lake before human beings gave the lake a name. And if people behave carelessly, if they disturb the water, if they forget that this place has a power of its own, that thing may awaken. In some stories about Lake Champlain, it is said that indigenous people once warned those who came later not to make noise on the lake, not to stir or disturb the water too much, because doing so might awaken the great serpent below. Though this detail should be understood as a piece of legend rather than an absolute historical record, it remains deeply evocative. It shows that the lake was not merely a resource to be used. The lake was a presence to be respected. And the giant serpent, whether or not it existed in a biological sense, became a symbol of limits. There are places human beings should not enter with arrogance. When Europeans came to this region, they brought with them their own languages, beliefs, and imagination. They also brought a different way of looking at land and water, measuring, recording, owning, exploiting, and placing names on maps. Yet the stories already living around the lake did not disappear immediately. They merged with new rumors. One person heard a story about a water serpent. Another saw a large object on the lake. A sailor repeated the tale in a tavern. A local resident added a detail he had heard from his father. Over time, the image of the creature beneath the lake began to move from indigenous memory into regional legend, and then from regional legend into popular culture. This is what often happens in places with long-lived mysteries. An image that may once have carried sacred or cautionary meaning within an indigenous culture gradually changes as it passes through the mouths of other communities. It becomes a lake monster, It is described as a creature to be hunted, proved photographed, and placed in newspapers. The older layers of meaning do not vanish completely, but they are covered over by modern curiosity. From a spirit or guardian of deep water, it becomes an entertaining question: what is living under the lake? And this is exactly where we need to slow down for a moment, because there is a great distance between indigenous legend and the modern myth of Champ. We should not take ancient stories and use them to claim that Champ is certainly real. Nor should we treat those legends merely as colorful decoration at the beginning of a monster story. These traditions deserve to be understood as a way that people living beside the lake experienced the lake itself, intimate, dangerous, practical, and sacred, all at once. They tell us more about the relationship between human beings and deep water than they do about any specific animal. But that does not make them less fascinating. On the contrary, it makes them deeper. Because when we hear of a giant serpent beneath the lake, we are not only hearing about an imagined creature, we are hearing about long winters, vast waterways, journeys through fog, the fear that a canoe might overturn in the cold, and the respect given to a place where the bottom cannot be seen. That serpent may be the shadow of a large fish, the shape of a wave, a drifting branch, an exaggerated memory, but it may also be a symbol of everything the lake keeps beyond the reach of human hands. The image of the water serpent has a very particular power because it is both familiar and strange. A serpent is a creature of the land, but when placed in the water, it becomes harder to grasp. Its long body can bend with the waves. It can vanish without leaving a trace. It needs no legs, no loud sound. A single curve through darkness is enough to make people shiver. Add to that horns' enormous size, or the ability to live in cold depths, and the water serpent becomes an almost perfect image for one of humanity's oldest fears, the fear of what is hidden beneath the surface. Lake Champlain, with its length, depth, and cold winters, makes that image even more vivid. On a peaceful day, the lake can invite people to paddle fish, sit along the shore, and watch sunlight fall across the waves. But the same lake, when fog descends, can erase the feeling of direction completely. The shoreline blurs. Sounds travel far and become distorted. A small object in the distance can appear larger than it truly is. A flock of water birds can make the lake's surface move as though a long body were gliding beneath it. A wet log pushed by the wind in rhythm with the waves can for a few seconds take on the shape of a curved neck. These natural explanations do not make the legend poorer. They simply show why legends can arise in such a deeply human way. In earlier times, people had no cameras, no satellite images, no modern depth-measuring devices. They had eyes, ears, experience, memory, and stories. When something strange happened, a story helped them pass it on to others. And when a story was told many times, the strange event no longer remained a single, isolated moment. It became part of the place itself. Perhaps that is what happened at Lake Champlain over a very long time. Each time someone saw an unusual object on the water, the old story received another breath. Each time a child heard adults speak of the serpent beneath the lake, the water beyond the shore grew deeper in that child's imagination. Each time a stranger came to the region and heard that the lake had a mysterious creature, they began to look at the waves with different eyes. A legend does not need to appear every day. It only needs to lie still like an ember under ash waiting for a small wind to glow again. Then over time, as new communities grew around the lake, as roads expanded, as boats traveled more often, as newspapers began to pay attention to strange stories, the creature beneath the lake gradually took on a new shape in the modern imagination. It was no longer only the serpent of old accounts. It began to be called by a name that was easier to remember, friendlier, and closer to popular culture: Champ. That name turned the creature into a character. It could be drawn, sculpted, printed on shirts, appear in travel stories, and become a symbol for the entire lake region. But if we listen carefully beneath the name Champ, there is still an echo of older legends. Beneath the modern lake monster image, there remains the shadow of the ancient water serpent. Beneath the cheerful curiosity of tourists, there is still a very old feeling, not knowing what lies beneath the water. That is why this story cannot begin directly with photographs, sighting reports, or searches for strange creatures. It must pass first through the deeper memory, where the lake was first felt as a place with a soul, with danger, and with secrets. We can imagine a cold morning on Lake Champlain, before cameras, before tourist maps, before debates over evidence. Fog lies low on the water. A canoe glides gently across the lake, barely making a sound. The person sitting inside it does not speak much, because in that fog, every sound seems larger than usual. Suddenly, far away, the surface of the water rises into a dark line, then disappears. No one is certain what they have just seen. It could be a fish, it could be wood, it could be a wave. But when they return to shore, that moment will not completely vanish. It will be told again, first with hesitation, then with more images, more breath, more darkness. And that story, over time, will find listeners. The listeners will carry it to another night, another fireside, another generation. That is how legends travel, not like hard evidence, but like mist. They cling to places. They slip through the gaps of history. They change shape without losing the original feeling. And that feeling, in the case of Lake Champlain, is the sense that this vast body of water has never fully belonged to human beings. When we call these stories legends, that does not mean they are meaningless. Legend is one way human beings preserve experience through images. It says, "Be careful with deep water." Respect the place where you cannot see the bottom. Remember that nature does not always stand still, so you may understand it. And if a giant serpent was the strongest image for passing down that lesson, then that serpent fulfilled its role across many generations. And so before Champ became a famous name, before Mansi became a photograph to be analyzed and debated, Lake Champlain already had a deep darkness where legend could dwell. That darkness was not ignorance, it was listening. It was the way people living near the lake understood that some places must be approached with humility. It was the feeling that water does not only reflect the sky, but also keeps things that human beings cannot rush to name. Night slowly falls over the lake. The lines of trees along the shore turn into one long black band. The wind slows, and the surface of the water seems to be covered by a thin layer of silence. In that darkness, we can understand why the image of the giant serpent has endured for so long. It does not need to appear clearly. It does not need to leave tracks on the shore. It only needs to exist in the story, in the caution of the paddler, in the longer gaze of the person standing beside the water, in the feeling that beneath those cold waves, the lake still holds a piece of memory that does not fully belong to us. And when the name Champ appeared later, it did not come from nowhere. It rose from that very fog, from old warnings, from the image of the water serpent, from fear and respect for the deep lake. The modern monster may carry a new name, a new face, a new life in newspapers and tourism. But beneath it still lies a much older question when human beings stand before a body of water that is cold wide and impossible to see through. Is what they glimpse out there only a wave or the shadow of a secret that has lived in the imagination far longer than they realize? There are places on Earth that, when seen with the naked eye, make us think we already understand them. A hill is a hill, a valley is a valley, a lake is a lake. The water lies there, with shores, with waves, with boats passing across it, with mist-covered mornings and afternoons reflecting the glow of sunset. But sometimes the landscape before our eyes is only the thin skin of a very long story. Beneath that peace are ice, salt sea, and the slow movements of stone and earth across thousands of years. Lake Champlain today is a freshwater lake. A person can stand on its shore and see small towns, rows of trees changing color with the seasons, white boats moving across the water in summer, and pale gray sheets of ice lying still when winter arrives. But if we could step far enough back farther than every photograph, farther than the stories of Champ, farther even than the oral tales told around firelight, we would see an entirely different world. This place was not always a lake. It was once part of a cold sea, an arm of salt water reaching deep inland after the Ice Age. Imagine Lake Champlain losing the familiar shape it has today. The present shorelines fade away. The towns have not yet come into being. The roads have not yet been opened. Even the forests have not yet settled into the forms we know now. Across that land, ice once lay like an enormous weight. Not a thin layer of winter snow, but true glacial ice, thick, vast, cold, and so heavy that the ground beneath it was pressed downward in silence. For a very long time, this world held no sound of paddles, no footsteps on grassy banks, only ice-stone wind and the immense pressure of time. A glacier does not simply pass across a landscape like a visitor. It changes the shape of the land. It smooths stone. It carves valleys deeper. It pushes poles, grinds, and leaves behind traces that human beings would only learn to read many thousands of years later. The mountains around the Champlain region, the softened valleys, the layers of sediment lying deep within the earth, all carry the fingerprints of that frozen age. You might stand today on a modern road and feel nothing unusual yet. Beneath your feet, the ground is still holding the story of a mass of ice once large enough to make an entire region bow beneath it. Then the climate changed. The ice began to retreat. Not in a single day, nor in a single season. It retreated so slowly that if a human being had stood there, watching perhaps an entire lifetime, would have revealed only a very small part of the movement. But to the earth, that slowness was still motion. Ice melted. Water found paths. Valleys that had been pressed below sea level began to open. And when the glacial barrier no longer held the water back, as before, the sea from the Atlantic followed the lowlands and poured in. From that, the Champlain Sea was born. The name may sound strange because today we are used to calling this place a lake. But for a period after the Ice Age, the Champlain region was not an isolated freshwater lake. It was an inland arm of the sea, a body of salt water reaching deep into the continent, covering areas that would later belong to New York, Vermont, Quebec, and Ontario. The water then did not have the same life as present-day Lake Champlain. It carried the breath of the ocean. It had tide salt and marine creatures swimming through places where human beings would later build homes, lay roads, farm the land, and tell stories of lake monsters. Let us pause with that image for a moment. A land that today has meadows, railroad tracks, wooden houses, rocky shores, and quiet towns once lay beneath cold seawater. Places where people now walk on an afternoon may once have been soft seabed. Deep layers of clay below the ground may have settled from ancient salt water. And within that space, sunlight once passed through water, unlike the lake water of today, shining down into a cold, dim world that was alive in its own way. This truth is what makes the story of Lake Champlain far deeper than a simple monster legend. When people stand beside the lake and feel that this place is holding something ancient, that feeling is not entirely without foundation. Not because science has proven that a prehistoric monster is living in the lake. That has not been confirmed. But this land truly does have a past far older, saltier, and stranger than its outward appearance suggests. Beneath the fresh water of the present lies the memory of the sea. Beneath the modern story lies a layer of time so deep that the imagination is easily pulled downward with it. The Champlain Sea existed for a period that was not long when measured against the history of Earth, but very long when measured against a human life. Thousands of years were enough for a body of water to form a life of its own, enough for sediment to settle, enough for marine creatures to pass through, enough for the shoreline to change little by little as the land slowly rose again. For when the ice retreated, the immense weight that had once pressed down on the ground also disappeared. The land began to rebound very slowly, like a cushion that had been compressed for a long time, and then gradually began to expand again. That process is called isostatic rebound, but in our story we can imagine it more simply. After a long sleep beneath the ice, the earth began to breathe again. As the land rose, the sea gradually withdrew. Salt water could no longer hold the lowlands as it once had. Connections with the ocean changed. Fresh water from rivers, streams, melting ice, and rain slowly became dominant. Little by little, that inland sea lost its salt. Ancient shorelines were left behind on hillsides. Marine mud lay still beneath the soil. The saltwater world closed, and from that closing, a freshwater lake slowly took shape. Lake Champlain, as we know it today, did not appear from nothing. It was the result of a very long transformation from ice to sea, from sea to lake. There is something deeply quiet in that process. There was no single moment when we could say, this is where the sea ended, this is where the lake began. Nature rarely changes along sharp borders the way books sometimes suggest. It changes color gradually. Salt becomes brackish, brackish becomes fresh. Seashore becomes lakeshore. Seabed becomes land. The creatures of the ocean leave or disappear, while species adapted to fresh water begin to claim the new space. The landscape receives a new name long after it has already changed its life. If we could stand on a high point and look down upon the Champlain Sea in that age, the scene might feel both familiar and strange. The mountains would still be there, but the lines of water would be different. The valleys would still open outward, but many places would be submerged beneath salt water. There would be no city of Burlington as there is today. No bridges, no roads, no marinas, no nightlights reflected on the water. Only a cold sea stretching inland, with distant shores blurred in mist, with ice still lingering to the north, with seasons changing slowly and wildly. In that world, if a large creature rose from the water, it would not be a monster in the legendary sense. It would simply be part of the life of the ancient sea. That is what makes Champlain's past both beautiful and strange. Things that today sound almost impossible, marine fish, sea animals, marine sediments lying deep inland, were once natural realities. People in later times may be astonished to learn that a freshwater lake region was once a sea. But the earth is not astonished. To the earth, coastlines can always move, land can always rise, or sink ice can always come and retreat and a place that seems quiet today may once have been a gateway to the ocean. That is why when telling the story of Mansi and Champ, we should not leave out the Champlain Sea, not to use it as proof that an ancient animal must still be living beneath the lake, but to understand why this lake is so powerful in the imagination. An ordinary lake can give birth to rumors, but a lake that was once an ancient sea sends the imagination farther. It makes people wonder if this place has changed so profoundly before what else may be lying beneath the water. If the land can hide a salty past in the middle of the continent, could the present lake be hiding some other secret? Science answers such questions with evidence. It reads the layers of earth. It measures sediment. It searches for the shells of tiny marine organisms. It reconstructs ancient water levels. It distinguishes between what can be verified and what is only speculation. And a story, if told properly, can walk beside science without distorting it. It helps us feel geological truth not as a dry table of data, but as a scene slowly unfolding before our eyes. Ice retreating, salt water pouring in sea, covering the valley land, rising sea withdrawing, and the lake remaining. Perhaps in the quiet of night as you listen to this story, the most powerful thing to imagine is not a monster suddenly rising from the water. What is more worth imagining is the lake itself changing shape through time. See Lake Champlain as a slow-motion film. At first, white ice covers everything. Then the ice cracks and meltwater becomes cold streams. Then the sea rushes in wide and salty, carrying the life of the ocean with it. Then the waterline recedes. Submerged areas become land. Layers of mud sink down into evidence. Finally, the present lake remains beneath the sky so quiet that people forget it once had another life. That forgetting is not humanity's fault. Everyday life always makes us see landscapes through the present. A person fishing looks at the lake and thinks about the weather, the current, whether a fish will bite. A family on vacation looks at the lake and thinks about the afternoon, the meal, the small boat, the memory photograph. A person standing on the shore in winter looks at the ice and thinks about the cold in front of them. Very few people can naturally look through 10,000 years and see the ancient sea beneath. But once you know the landscape is no longer the same, when you know that Lake Champlain was once the Champlain Sea, every wind across the water carries another depth. The small layers of waves are not only waves of the present. They are like a faint echo of salt water that once passed through this place. The rocky shores are not only places where waves strike. They are like the edges of a geological book whose letters have been blurred by time. The deep mud below is not merely mud. It is a set of sedimentary pages recording when the water was still salty, when it began to grow fresher, when the sea left, and the lake began to keep its own silence. In stories of lake monsters around the world, people are often drawn to the possibility that an ancient creature may have survived from a lost age. That idea is powerful because it gives the feeling that the past is still breathing just beneath the present. But at Lake Champlain, geological truth already carries that feeling on its own. The past truly is still there, not in the form of a proven monster, but in the form of earthstone sediment and traces of an ancient sea lying beneath the valley. The fossil of geological memory does not need to swim to the surface in order to exist. It lies still, and that stillness makes it more enduring than any rumor. But human beings do not only want to know through numbers, human beings want to feel. So, when we hear that the lake was once a sea, we do not merely remember a scientific fact. We look again at the water through imagination. We wonder what sounds the depths of today might once have heard. We imagine salt water touching the hillsides, marine creatures drifting past newly formed shores, layers of mud settling into cold darkness. We imagine a world with no name, Lake Champlain, no Champ, no Mansi, yet already strange enough to make people today fall silent when they learn of it. And it is at this point that the story becomes gentler, deeper. Because the mystery no longer lies only in whether a shadow once moved across the surface of the water. It lies in the fact that an entire region once wore a different form. The lake is like a dream left behind after the sea withdrew. On the surface, it reflects clouds. Beneath it, it holds within itself a history of pressure, melting, flooding, rising, and changing color. This is the kind of mystery that does not need a loud sound. It only asks us to sit still long enough to feel time lying beneath the water. On a gray afternoon, if you stand beside Lake Champlain and look into the distance, you may see the horizon blurred between water and mountains. The wind may darken the lake in patches. A small boat may pass by, leaving behind a slow trail of waves. Everything appears to belong to the present. But if you imagine one more layer, you may see the ancient sea laid over the lake like a cold, gentle ghost. The water is deeper, saltier. The shore is different. The air is different. A world that has passed away has not entirely vanished. It has only changed the way it appears. That is why the Champlain Sea is an indispensable part of this journey. It moves us beyond the narrow question of, is there a monster or not, and into a larger, more beautiful question. What was this place before, and how does its memory still shape human imagination? When a lake has a past like this, legend does not grow on empty ground. It grows on a land that was once pressed down by ice, once covered by sea, and changed its form many times before human beings arrived to give it a name. And then very slowly, the sea withdrew. Not like a door slamming shut, but like a breath drawing back. Salt water left the valley. The land continued to rise. The old traces were covered by forest grass, mudstone, and new life. The freshwater lake remained quieter, more enclosed, more familiar to human beings. But in the deeper layers, the story of the ancient sea has not fallen completely silent. It waits to be found in clay, in stone, in unexpected discoveries, and in the strange feeling that beneath a peaceful lake, there was once an entire cold sea. And from that truth, our journey can move deeper. Because if a lake was once a sea, then the land around it may also be holding evidence that the naked eye cannot see. Perhaps beneath the fields, beneath the mud, beneath places that seem entirely ordinary, the past is still lying there quiet and more intact than anyone imagined. Lake Champlain does not need to say very much. It only needs to lie still beneath the evening sky, and for us to know that this place once held salt, once held ice, once held the sea. That is enough for its silence to become vast. There are some secrets that do not lie beneath the water, but deep within the earth, silently waiting for a shovel, a pickaxe, or an ordinary construction project to accidentally awaken them. Lake Champlain has its wide surface, its mist, its stories of dark shapes on the water. But sometimes the strangest thing about this lake region does not rise among the waves. It lies beneath a field in Vermont, far from the ocean, under a layer of blue clay in the silent posture of a creature that once swam through an ancient sea. In 1849, while workers were building the first railroad line connecting Rutland and Burlington, they dug into the land near Charlotte, Vermont. To them, it was simply work. The earth had to be cut open, the rails had to be laid down, and the small hills had to give way to a new age of transportation goods and movement. No one stepped into that morning thinking they were about to touch a fragment of Ice Age memory. Before them were only soil-stone sweat tools, the sound of metal striking metal, and the steady rhythm of labor in a peaceful rural landscape. Then in the earth they had dug up, they saw bones. At first, the discovery was not necessarily astonishing. In farming regions, people might come across old animal bones, horse bones, cow bones, the ordinary traces of life on land. But these bones were different somehow. They did not resemble what people were used to finding in Vermont. Part of the skull was damaged during the digging because the workers did not yet know what they had touched. Only when a local resident noticed the unusual shape of the bones did the work stop long enough for someone to call a naturalist to examine them. Imagine that moment slowly. A fresh mound of earth, dark, damp soil carrying the cold smell of the deeper layer below. Among mud and gravel, the bones appeared incomplete, like scattered letters from a story that had been buried for far too long. Those standing nearby may not yet have understood what they were seeing, but they still felt that something did not belong there. A bone too strange, a curve too different, a vague sensation that the familiar ground beneath their feet had suddenly opened into a very deep doorway. When the naturalist Zadok Thompson of the University of Vermont was called in, the story began to change. The bones were no longer an obstacle in a railroad project. They became a scientific question. Thompson and later researchers realized that these were not horse bones, nor were they the bones of any land animal native to Vermont. They were the bones of a white whale, or beluga, a marine whale usually associated with the cold waters of the north. A whale in Vermont. That sentence alone is enough to make the imagination pause. Vermont is a land of green mountains, forests, farms, freshwater lakes, snow-covered winters, and dirt roads running through small villages. It is not a place where people expect to find a whale. The ocean is far away. Between that quiet field and the sea are mountains, land, and a distance that seems to have nothing to do with a marine creature. But the skeleton did not care what human beings found reasonable. It lay there real and silent, forcing people to question the entire history of the land. The Charlotte whale, as it later came to be called, was about 12 feet long. Signs in its teeth and skull showed that it was an adult individual, though its sex could not be determined. It was not a giant monster from legend. It was not a mysterious creature hiding beneath the modern surface of the lake. It was a real beluga, a white-bodied creature that lived in a cold marine environment, once swimming through waters where today human beings see fields and roads. Its strangeness did not lie in its size, but in its location. A body of the sea lay beneath the land. To understand how that could happen, we must return to the story of the Champlain Sea, the ancient sea that once poured into the valley after the glaciers retreated. When enormous sheets of ice still pressed down upon North America, the ground was pushed downward under an unimaginable weight. When the ice melted and withdrew northward, ocean water was able to flow into the lowlands that were still sunken. For a long period after the Ice Age, the Champlain region was not a freshwater lake, as it is today, but a cold arm of the sea connected to the world of the ocean. And within that sea, a beluga lived, swam, breathed, and then died, for a reason we cannot know for certain today. Perhaps it died in shallow water. Perhaps its body drifted into a quiet bay. Perhaps it sank to a still seabed where there were not enough large scavengers to drag its bones apart. Then layer by layer, mud clay and fine sediment began to cover it. No noise, no urgency, only the very slow process of nature. One thin layer today, another tomorrow, season after season, year after year, until that body of the sea was wrapped in the darkness of sediment. This is what makes the discovery at Charlotte beautiful in such a quiet way. The whale skeleton was not merely a strange object beneath the ground. It was evidence of a scene that had vanished. When we look at those bones, we do not see only a dead animal. We see salt water that once covered this region. We see glaciers that once retreated. We see land that had once been pressed down and then slowly lifted again. We see an ancient sea that once had a life of its own, real enough to sustain a beluga, long-lasting enough to preserve its body in mud, deep enough to bury that story for thousands of years. Perhaps at the moment the skeleton was identified as a whale, the people standing there felt something very difficult to describe. Not the fear of a monster, not the excitement of a rumor, but the feeling that the ground itself had suddenly become unfamiliar. Because if the earth can hide a whale, then the landscape around us is no longer as simple as it appears. A field is not only a field. A layer of soil is not only a layer of soil. A peaceful rural place may once have been the bottom of a cold sea, where white creatures swam through the dim light of deep water. The Charlotte whale skeleton later became one of the important pieces of evidence that helped people better understand the glacial past of New England and the Champlain Basin. It appeared at a time when the science of the Ice Age ancient sea levels and post-glacial land uplift was still developing. That whale was like a message sent from an age no human being had ever witnessed. It did not speak with sound. It spoke through its location. I am a creature of the sea, yet I lie in the soil of Vermont. If that seems unreasonable to you, perhaps what needs to change is not the skeleton, but the way you understand the history of this land. From there, the story widens. The layers of blue clay were no longer lifeless material. They became the blanket that had preserved an ancient creature. Fragments of shells, traces of plants, and fine sediments around the skeleton became supporting details, but deeply meaningful ones, like the background surrounding a central character. They showed that the whale had not ended up there by accident. It belonged to an environment that once existed. A quiet bay or river mouth of the Champlain Sea, where fine mud settled evenly enough to protect the skeleton from complete disintegration. We can imagine the final moments of its life, but we must imagine them with humility. No one knows exactly how it died. No human eyes saw that moment. We can only picture cold water, pale light, a slow current, and a white body gradually sinking toward the bottom. Around it was a post-glacial marine world with smaller creatures, silent layers of sediment, and sounds softened by water. Then silence, then mud, then time. Time did the rest. The sea withdrew, the land rose. Salt water left the valley. Fresh water gradually took its place. Forests returned. Land animals passed through. Human beings came to live there. Generations followed one another, naming, building, walking across that land, perhaps never knowing that beneath their feet lay a whale skeleton, like a question that had not yet been asked. Thousands of years passed. The landscape changed its form, but the skeleton remained there beneath the clay, preserving a part of the ancient sea within the land. And then the 19th century arrived with railroads and industry, with the belief that human beings could open paths through the land in order to connect regions together. Strangely enough, it was a symbol of modernity, the railroad that accidentally opened a doorway into the distant past. Rails were laid down to carry humanity forward, but the shovel that dug for those rails touched a creature from the post-glacial age. In one moment, the modern and the ancient met the sound of hammer's iron and construction, and the silence of a whale that had died around 11,000 years before. There is a special beauty in that meeting. Human beings often think they search for the past in museums, in books, in planned excavations. But often the past appears on its own in places where no one is prepared. It steps out of the earth when a road is opened. It emerges from the mud of a construction site. It interrupts the work of an ordinary day with a question far larger than how many more meters of earth must be dug. And when that happens, we realize that natural history is not far away. It is right beneath our feet, patient and silent. The Charlotte whale also helps us look back at the stories of Lake Champlain with a different state of mind. It does not prove that Champ is real. It does not turn the Mansi photograph into final evidence. It does not say that a prehistoric monster is swimming in the lake today. But it does something deeper. It proves that this region truly was once far stranger than its present appearance suggests. It shows that things that sound impossible, a whale beneath a field in Vermont, can still be true if we understand enough about glaciers, ancient seas, and geological time. That is why the skeleton matters in the larger current of our story. It is a bridge between legend and science. Legend says the lake holds mysteries. Science does not repeat that legend in the same language, but science offers a real mystery, a marine animal lying beneath the land, preserved by the sediments of a vanished sea. The two are not the same, and we should not mix them together carelessly. But when placed side by side, they make Lake Champlain a place of extraordinary depth, not only deep in water, but deep in memory. Today, the Charlotte whale skeleton is displayed at the Perkins Museum of Geology at the University of Vermont. In the space of the museum, it no longer lies in cold mud. It is supported, observed, and connected to explanatory labels and scientific questions. Visitors can stand before it, look at the long skull, the vertebrae, the form preserved through time, and try to imagine the creature not as a dry skeleton, but as a white body that once moved through cold seawater. A creature that once needed air, once rose to breathe, once heard underwater sounds in a way human beings can never fully understand. But even inside the museum, the strangeness remains. Because the longer we look at that skeleton, the more we feel that it does not belong only to the past. It makes the present wider. A child standing before the glass case may ask, "How did a whale end up in Vermont?" An adult may read the answer and suddenly realize that the ground is not as fixed as it seems. What today is Mountain Field Lake, Town Road, may once have been sea ice, seabed, the living space of another kind of creature. And if the landscape can change that much, then the piece before our eyes is no longer simple. It becomes a thin layer over a very long story. With the voice of a bedtime story, we can let that image settle very slowly. A white whale swimming through an ancient cold sea, then sinking into a quiet place held by the earth for thousands of years. Above it, the sea withdraws. Forests grow, snow falls and melts. Human beings come and go. Carriages, railroads, towns, museums, all appear one after another. And in the middle of that river of time, the skeleton remains there, like a breath held still waiting for the day it will be found. Perhaps what makes the Charlotte whale so haunting is not only the strangeness of the discovery, it is the gentleness of the evidence. It does not need to frighten anyone. It does not need to rise from the lake on a misty afternoon. It does not need to leave behind a disputed photograph. It simply lies there beneath the earth, and when it is found, it tells a story far clearer than most. This region was once a sea ice, once pressed heavily upon the land, salt water, once poured in, marine life once lived here, and time can turn a seabed into farmland without asking human permission. So, when we return to Lake Champlain after this story, the lake seems to carry another layer of silence. We do not think only of Mansi's shape on the water or the echoes of great serpent legends in the night. We also think of a whale skeleton beneath the soil of Vermont, real evidence that the past of this place once opened outward toward the ocean. In a world like that, mystery does not need to be invented. It is already there in the clay, in the bones, in the fine layers of sediment, in the way the earth preserves its own memory. After the Mansi photograph, after the legends of water serpents, after the memory of an ancient sea, and the whale skeleton lying beneath the soil of Vermont, we return to the present surface of Lake Champlain. Not the water of 10,000 years ago, not the water of stories told beside the fire, but the lake as it exists today, cold, deep, wide, and seemingly quiet, as if it does not wish to reveal anything too quickly. If you stand on the shore in the late afternoon, everything may appear completely ordinary. A few small waves touch the stones. Far away there are boats, water birds, and the fading light of the sky upon the lake's surface. But beneath that layer of water, where the light begins to weaken, where soft mud spreads across the bottom, a real creature is still alive. It is not a monster. It is not a ghost from the Ice Age. It is not a sacred serpent from legend. But if you were to see it for only a few seconds in dark water, perhaps you would understand why human beings so easily imagine something ancient beneath a deep lake. It is the lake sturgeon. The lake sturgeon does not need to be invented in order to become strange. Its very body already carries the appearance of a living fragment of the past. Long, heavy dark gray or pale brown covered with bony plates running along its sides. Its head does not resemble the fish we are used to seeing. Its snout protrudes, and beneath it hang sensory barbels like tiny fingers feeling their way through the mud. Its mouth is on the underside, not fierce like the jaws of a predator, but like a soft doorway opening toward the bottom, drawing in small food from sand, mud, and gravel. If a lake sturgeon glides through dim water, it does not look like a swift creature of the present. It looks like something that has wandered out of another age. Its tail is somewhat like a shark's tail. Its back rises gently. Its body carries a rough armor. It does not need bright colors nor violent movement. It only needs to pass slowly by, and we already feel as though we are seeing a very deep part of natural history still breathing. People often call the lake sturgeon a living fossil. That phrase does not mean it has never changed through time, nor does it mean it is an ancient animal, preserved unchanged since the age of dinosaurs. But the name points toward an astonishing truth. Its lineage is very old, reaching back hundreds of millions of years, and its body still retains many features that remind us of distant eras of life beneath the water. In a world where countless species have come and gone, the sturgeon remains like a long, low note, slow enduring and persistent. This is what makes it so different from legendary creatures. Champ Mansi, giant water serpents, all of them live in the hazy space between testimony and uncertainty. But the lake sturgeon is real. It has a scientific name. It has a biological record. Researchers monitor it. It appears in conservation programs. Its length can be measured, its weight, recorded its age, estimated its behavior, observed. And precisely because it is real, its strangeness becomes even deeper. Not every mystery beneath the water needs to be a monster. Sometimes a real creature is already enough to make us fall silent. Lake Champlain is a place where the lake sturgeon holds special meaning. It is considered one of the largest and longest-lived fish in the lake. Some lake sturgeon individuals in North America can reach about 7 feet in length, weigh hundreds of pounds, and live for more than a century. Let that number settle for a moment. A fish can outlive many short generations of human memory. Perhaps when a child first hears about Champ somewhere beneath the lake, an old sturgeon is already moving quietly through the mud. When that child grows up, grows old, and tells the story to grandchildren, that same fish may still be alive, still following familiar waterways, still keeping its own slow rhythm along the bottom of the lake. That long life makes the lake sturgeon almost the opposite of the modern pace of life. Human beings want quick proof, clear photographs, certain conclusions. The sturgeon lives slowly. It matures slowly. It reproduces slowly. It returns to spawning grounds according to long cycles. It is not in a hurry to satisfy our curiosity. It exists in another way, quietly, steadily, rarely seen, and for that very reason, all the more easily surrounded by a sense of mystery. Imagine a camera descending beneath the surface of Lake Champlain. At first, the water is still bright. Sunbeams shimmer above. A few small fish dart past. Then the camera sinks deeper. The blue gradually turns gray. The lake bed appears with sand, mud, gravel, decaying tree trunks, and dark shapes that cannot be clearly named. Every movement seems to slow down. Even sound feels as if the water has swallowed part of it. And then, from the edge of the frame, a large shadow appears. It does not rush forward. It does not hunt. It only glides by. First comes the blunt, elongated snout, then the small barbels beneath the chin, then the broad head, the heavy body, the rows of bony plates rising like ancient ridges. It moves close to the bottom, barely disturbing the water. Its small eyes do not look at us in the way human beings might expect. Its mouth, beneath the body, searches for tiny creatures in the muddy floor. It passes like a shadow, with weight, like a fragment of time, crawling across the bottom of the lake. If you did not know it was a sturgeon, if you saw only part of its body for a few seconds through cloudy water and fractured light, your imagination could do the rest very quickly. But the truth about the sturgeon is no less captivating. It does not need to be a man-eating monster or an unknown giant creature. It is a resident of the lake bottom, an ancient fish that survives by searching for small food such as insect larvae, invertebrates, mollusks, and creatures living in or near the mud. It does not rule the lake through ferocity. It exists through long adaptation. Its body is built for a life near the bottom, where touch, scent, current, and patience matter more than speed. These traits make the sturgeon a wonderful figure in this story. It offers a beautiful choice for the storyteller between an imagined monster and a real creature. Sometimes the real creature is even more astonishing. A fish that can live for 100 years. A species whose history reaches farther back than many prehistoric symbols we are used to thinking about. An armored body still swimming quietly beneath the surface of a lake where human beings tell stories of Champ. This does not replace mystery by taking it away. It brings mystery back down to the ground of truth. In many legends of deep lakes, people often search for a long-necked creature, a head rising above the water, a large body bending through the waves. But beneath Lake Champlain, the truly ancient creature does not necessarily appear in the form human beings expect. It does not lift its neck out of the water to be photographed. It does not need to reveal itself in the mist. It lives in a lower layer closer to the mud with less of a stage around it. It does not appear in order to astonish people. It simply lives, and that alone is strange enough. Because it lives so long and reproduces so slowly, the lake sturgeon is also highly vulnerable to human change. A species may survive millions of years of natural upheaval and still decline quickly when faced with overfishing loss of spawning grounds, pollution dams blocking waterways, and disturbance to its environment. This is the sad paradox of ancient creatures. They may seem immortal in our imagination, but in real life they remain fragile. One individual may live a very long time, but if it is caught before reproducing, or if its spawning grounds are destroyed, an entire population may take decades to recover, if recovery remains possible at all. In Lake Champlain, the lake sturgeon was once part of the native ecosystem. But like in many other places across North America, it has faced strong pressure from human activity. Its slow life makes recovery difficult. A small fish species can reproduce quickly and restore its numbers within a few seasons. The sturgeon cannot. It needs a long time to mature. It needs flowing water, rocky and gravelly bottoms, and suitable conditions. It needs patience not only from nature, but from human beings. There is something deeply quiet about protecting a species like this. Conserving the sturgeon is not like saving a charming symbol that appears often before our eyes. It means protecting a silent resident, a creature that many people living around the lake may never see directly in their entire lives. People protect it not because it gives them spectacular moments every day, but because it is a deep part of the lake. It belongs to the old structure of this place, to an ecological current that has existed longer than tourist stories, longer than newspapers, longer even than modern names. And when we think this way, we begin to see that the lake sturgeon is not only a fish, it is one way of understanding Lake Champlain. The lake does not have only a surface for reflecting clouds. It has layers of life beneath. There are creatures that float on the surface, creatures that swim through the middle waters, and creatures that lie close to the bottom. There are short-lived beings and beings that live so long they almost become memory. The sturgeon belongs to that layer of memory. It does not tell stories with words, but its body is a story of ancientness, endurance, vulnerability, and quiet life in a place human beings rarely see. On a quiet summer night when the lake is not frozen, when the water only moves gently beneath the moonlight, imagine that somewhere below an old sturgeon is passing through its familiar bottomlands. On the surface, perhaps someone is telling a story about Champ. Perhaps a child is asking whether the lake monster is real. Perhaps someone is staring into the distance and noticing a strange ripple. But below that ancient creature knows nothing of the name Champ, nothing of Mansi, nothing of human debate. It only senses mudwater currents, the scent of the lake bed, and the rhythm of life that its lineage has kept for a length of time almost beyond imagination. Here the story must remain fair. The lake sturgeon does not explain every account in which people say they have seen Champ. We should not turn it into the single answer for every mysterious shape. The lake is wide, the light is complex, waves can deceive the eye, logs can drift in strange positions, water birds and large fish can create many different impressions. But the sturgeon remains a natural possibility worth remembering. Not because it matches every story perfectly, but because it shows that the lake truly does contain creatures large enough, ancient enough, and unusual enough to nourish the imagination. A person who sees the back of a sturgeon rise for a moment may not know what they have just seen. A gray body beneath cloudy water, a slow curve, a tail stirring lightly. If the distance is far, if the light is weak, if the story of Champ is already present in the mind, those few seconds may become the memory of a much larger creature. This does not mean the witness is lying. It simply shows that there is always a distance between what the eye sees and what the mind names. And within that distance, legend finds room to breathe. But this chapter does not need to go deeply into the illusions of the water just yet. What matters now is to see the sturgeon as itself, a real creature, an ancient resident of the lake, a form of life that does not need to play the role of a monster in order to deserve our attention. Once we know that the sturgeon exists, the story of Lake Champlain becomes richer. It is no longer only the question, is there something mysterious under the lake? It becomes a gentler question. Do we truly know what is living beneath the lake? That question suits a quiet night. Because when listening to a bedtime story, we do not need an answer that shakes the world. We only need an image deep enough for the mind to drift with. And the image of a sturgeon moving silently along the bottom of Lake Champlain is such an image. It swims through the darkness of fresh water, through mud, through stone, through spaces where light barely reaches. It carries on its body the ancient appearance of a lineage that has passed through countless seasons of the earth. It is not hurried. It does not explain. It simply exists. Perhaps that is what is most precious. In a world of rumors and blurred evidence, the lake sturgeon gives this story a real point of grounding. It reminds us that not every wonder must lie outside science. There are things that become more beautiful the more science confirms them. Knowing that a sturgeon can live for more than a century does not make it less mysterious. Knowing that it has ancient origins does not strip away its legendary quality. Knowing that it feeds on small creatures at the bottom does not make it ordinary. On the contrary, all of this makes it one of the lake's most silent witnesses. If the Mansi photograph is a moment that makes people look up toward the surface of the water, then the lake sturgeon is the reason we want to look deeper. Not to hunt for a monster, but to realize that beneath that cold surface, a real life is unfolding, slower and older than the blink of a human eye. Every old sturgeon is like a piece of time that knows how to swim. It does not belong to legend, but it touches the same part of the mind from which legend is born, the feeling that the natural world still holds forms of life, strange enough to make us humble. And then, when twilight falls over Lake Champlain, the surface returns to its familiar silence. No one sees the sturgeon. No one sees its ancient armored body gliding through the mud. On the shore, people may talk, walk, watch the waves, take photographs, and return home. But below that creature continues on its path. Slowly, heavily, calmly, as if it has learned something human beings often forget: the things that live the longest do not need to appear before our eyes every day. And precisely because it appears so rarely, the lake keeps its secret quality. The surface does not reveal the sturgeon at once. It does not say that beneath it lives an ancient species, one that has endured changes human beings have only recently learned to name. It simply lies still, letting waves cover the story, letting night fall, letting imagination grow quiet. If there is anything in this journey worthy of being called a living fossil beneath the water, perhaps it is not the monster drawn by imagination. It is the lake sturgeon, a real creature, ancient, fragile, and quiet as the deepest memory of Lake Champlain itself. From here, the story begins to lean toward another question. If creatures truly as strange as this live beneath the lake, if the water's surface can hide large bodies, slow movements, and ancient silhouettes, then what have human beings seen in those brief moments? Beside the lake, a real animal, a log, a ripple, or a part of the imagination awakened by the very things the lake has preserved for so long? That answer will bring us closer to the way human eyes look at water, and to the way sometimes from a very real shadow the mind can create a monster. After everything we have passed through the Mansi photograph, the legends of water serpents, the ancient Champlain Sea, the whale beneath the soil of Vermont, and the lake Sturgeon as a true living fossil, we return to the most difficult question. What did those who said they had seen Champ actually see, an animal not yet confirmed by science? A large fish, a log, an illusion on the surface of the water, or an ordinary moment transformed into legend by distance, light memory, and beliefs already present in the mind? That question must be approached very gently. Because when speaking about sightings of mysterious creatures, we can very easily fall into two extremes. One side believes immediately, as if every account were evidence. The other side dismisses everything at once, as if every witness were foolish or deliberately inventing a story. But human life is not that simple. People can be sincere and still misperceive. People can feel real fear and still misunderstand what they have seen. A memory can begin from a real moment, then over time, be filled in by imagination where details are missing. Science does not need to turn witnesses into liars. It simply asks, what were the conditions at that moment? How long did the person see it? How far away was it? What could the object have been? And is there any evidence left after that moment has passed? Lake Champlain is a perfect stage for such misperceptions. The lake is long, wide, with deep areas, foggy days, wind waves, water birds, large fish, small boats, buoys, branches, logs, and countless movements that appear for only a few seconds before vanishing. When a person stands on the shore or on a boat and looks into the distance, they are not observing an object inside a laboratory. They are looking through air, through reflected light, through a moving surface of water. Everything is unstable. Waves make objects rise and fall. Distance makes size difficult to judge. Fog blurs boundaries. And when the object disappears, what remains is not the object, but the memory of it. Water has a very soft way of deceiving the eye. On land, a still object gives us more chances to identify it. We can approach it, walk around it, look at it from different angles. But on a lake, things often happen in a very brief moment. Something rises, something sinks. Waves hide part of the body. Light distorts the outline. A diving bird disappears and appears somewhere else, making the viewer think it is the same creature moving beneath the water. A group of waves following one another can look like the back of a long animal. A waterlogged tree trunk can float at an angle, one end rising like a curved neck, then turning slightly with the current, as if it were alive. These are not explanations offered to drain the beauty from the story. On the contrary, they make the story deeper. They show us that lake monsters are not born only from the lake, but also from the way human beings look at the lake. Our eyes are designed to recognize quickly. In the wild, quick recognition once helped human beings survive. If you see a long shape in the grass, it is better to think it may be a snake before coming closer. If you hear a sound in the darkness, it is better to be cautious before knowing for certain. The human mind does not wait for complete data before constructing a shape. It often forms the image first, then checks afterward. On the far surface of a lake, where data is scarce and feeling is abundant, that habit can create very convincing creatures. There is a concept often mentioned in cognitive science. Human beings tend to see meaningful shapes in ambiguous images. We see faces in clouds, animals in tree shadows, human figures in marks on stone, and stories in a few scattered lines. This is not a weakness. It is a very natural part of the brain. But that variability, when placed before a wide body of water and stories already existing about Champ, can make a difficult moment feel more certain in the mind of the witness. Let us return to the Mansi photograph in that spirit. The photograph is famous because it is not so blurry that it can be ignored, yet not clear enough to end the debate. It shows a dark shape rising on the surface of the water, resembling part of a neck or a curved body. To believers, it is the moment when the lake revealed its secret resident. To skeptics, it may be a natural object seen from a misleading angle, perhaps a tree trunk or some other floating object. The problem is that the photograph lacks the things science needs most. The original negative is no longer available for deeper examination. The original shooting location was never firmly established, and without a location, without a distance, without a scale within the frame, the true size of the object becomes very difficult to determine. That lack of data is what has allowed the Mansi photograph to live so long in debate. It is suggestive enough to intrigue, but not enough to prove. This does not mean Sandra Mansi invented the story, nor does it mean that everyone interested in the photograph is gullible. It simply reveals a very important principle. A startling image does not automatically become complete evidence. To know whether an object is large or small, we need to know how far it was from the camera. To know whether it was a living creature or a drifting object, we need to observe its movement context, duration, water conditions, and multiple frames. A single photograph, especially one taken suddenly from a distance, is like a sentence cut out of a conversation. It can be deeply compelling, but we must be careful when using it to conclude the whole story. Sightings of Champ often share this same quality: brief, unexpected, difficult to repeat. Some people see a head. Some see a long body. Some see several humps rising and falling on the water. Some see a dark object moving across the lake and then disappearing. Each account may be sincere, but when placed beside one another, they do not always form a consistent shape. The creature in these accounts changes with the era, the viewer, the memory, and the expectation. At times it resembles a serpent. At times it resembles a long-necked prehistoric creature. At times it resembles a large fish. At times it is only an unclear, dark shadow. This does not make the accounts worthless, but it reminds us that legends often develop through many layers of observation, not through a clean dataset like one collected in a laboratory. One of the most difficult factors in observing across a lake is estimating size. The human eye is very easily mistaken when looking at objects on the surface of water, especially when there is no nearby object for comparison. A log only a few feet long may appear much larger if it is far away and rising at the right angle. A water bird with a long neck can look like a strange creature if seen only through mist. A large fish thrashing near the surface can create a pattern of waves that makes the viewer think a big body is moving underneath. When we do not know the distance, the brain often measures size by feeling. And feeling is very easily guided by story. Waves, too, can become co-authors of legend. On a large lake, waves do not come only from the wind. They also come from boats, currents, submerged objects, and reflections between rocky shores and open water. Many waves following one another can form rising humps looking like segments of the back of a long animal crawling forward. If the light is low, each wave crest can cast a small shadow, making the line of waves seem more bodily. A viewer needs only to see it for a few seconds, turn away to look for a camera, then look back after the shape has dissolved for memory to keep the clearest part and discard the remaining confusion. A log is an ordinary possibility, but one that is very easy to underestimate. Wood in water does not always lie flat and harmlessly. A tree trunk can become waterlogged unevenly, one end heavier than the other, one part rising, another part sinking. When waves lift and lower it, it can appear to breathe. When the current turns it very slowly, it can resemble a neck turning. If the trunk has roots, broken branches, or strange patches of bark, its shape becomes even harder to identify. A completely lifeless object can for a moment carry the appearance of life, especially when the viewer has already heard that this lake is home to a mysterious creature. Water birds also contribute to such misunderstandings. Some diving birds can disappear beneath the surface and then rise again at a different distance. From far away, people may not recognize that it is only a small bird. If they see only a neck and head through mist, or if they see several birds appearing in succession, the mind may connect them into an imagined long body. Large fish can do the same. Lake Champlain contains fish large enough to create noticeable movement. The lake sturgeon, with its long body and ancient appearance, does not have to be the explanation for every case, but its existence reminds us that the lake truly does contain large, quiet, hard-to-see creatures that can make a strong impression if they appear under unclear visual conditions. Then there is memory. This is the most delicate part. Memory is not a perfect camera. It is like a story rebuilt each time we recall it. When a person sees something strange, the emotion of that moment is powerful: surprise, fear, curiosity, confusion. That emotion makes the moment memorable, but it does not necessarily make every detail more accurate. Afterward, the person tells others. Listeners ask questions. Newspapers may use stronger words. The witness hears other similar stories. Over time, the original memory does not disappear, but it may become surrounded by layers of interpretation. A shadow that was something I could not identify gradually becomes a very large creature. An object that seemed to have a neck gradually becomes a long neck, like a prehistoric animal. This may sound cold, but it is deeply human. All of us have misremembered details from an important day. All of us have told a memory and realized someone else remembers it slightly differently. With Champ's sightings, the issue is not to mock the memories of witnesses. The issue is to understand that memory must be placed beside other kinds of evidence. If many people from different angles had recorded clear footage, if there were a biological sample, if there were sonar data, if there were physical traces, the story would be different. But when most of the evidence consists of brief accounts and blurry images, science must remain cautious. Science is cautious not because it hates mystery. Science is cautious because it knows mystery is very easily filled with what we want to believe. A lake tied to long-standing legends will make people look at it with expectation. A person who has never heard of Champ may see a log and call it a log. A person who has heard dozens of stories may see that same log and pause for longer, wondering whether they have just seen something else. Names have power. Once a place has a name for its monster, every strange movement on the water is easily pulled toward that name. But if we look more deeply, science does not take away the mystery of Lake Champlain. It only changes where the mystery is located. Instead of placing the mystery entirely inside an unproven creature, it shows us that the mystery lies in the interaction between the lake and human beings. The lake has real objects, real waves, real creatures, real mist, real light. Human beings have real eyes, real fears, real memories, real imagination. When all of these meet for a few seconds, a story can be born. That story is not entirely false, but it also does not fully prove what people think it proves. It is the twilight zone between event and meaning. Perhaps this is the fairest way to listen to stories about Champ, not kneeling before them as absolute evidence, but also not laughing them away as meaningless. Each account is a small fragment of the relationship between human beings and a deep lake. It shows that Lake Champlain is not a silent backdrop. It is a place capable of making people stop, doubt, imagine, and debate. Many museums and educational centers around the region also approach Champ in this way, not only as a monster to believe in or reject, but as a story where local history, science, real creatures, and unproven possibilities are placed on the table for viewers to think through for themselves. And when we return to the water at the end of this chapter, the question monster or illusion may no longer feel as simple as it did at the beginning. Some sightings may have been logs, some may have been waves, some may have been large freshwater birds floating objects, or a combination of light and expectation. Some moments may also remain not fully explained because the data disappeared along with the water. But what is certain is that Lake Champlain has enough depth, enough history, enough real creatures, and enough legend to ensure that the human mind will never see it as an ordinary lake. Night falls and the water darkens. A distant ripple appears and fades. Something drifts near the horizon, too far away to name. If you stood there alone in the cold wind, you could understand why the stories continue. Not because human beings always want to be deceived, but because human beings are always listening to places that have not finished speaking. Science will ask for evidence, and it should. But the story will still whisper at the edge of the water, because between what we know and what we do not yet know, there is always a small, dark space. At Lake Champlain, that dark space has a name, Champ. By the end of the journey, perhaps the question, "Is Champ real?" is no longer the only question. After the Mansi photograph, after the legends of water serpents, after the ancient Champlain Sea, after the whale skeleton beneath the soil of Vermont, after the lake sturgeon and the illusions on the surface of the water, we begin to realize something slower and deeper. A legend does not live by evidence alone. It lives through place. It lives through memory. It lives through the people who continue to look down into the lake and feel that beneath that cold layer of water, something has still not completely vanished. Lake Champlain in the afternoon has a peacefulness that can easily deceive. The water stretches between mountains and forests, sometimes pale blue like glass, sometimes deep gray beneath the clouds, sometimes shimmering with gold as the sun is about to set. Boats pass by, leaving behind only a few thin trails of waves. Waterbirds fly low over the lake. Children stand along the shore, pointing toward distant ripples. Adults smile, perhaps joking that Champ may have just swum past. And in that single moment, a monster that has never been proven becomes very real in the everyday life of the lake region. Champ is not only a shadow in the stories people tell. Over time, it has become a cultural symbol. The image of the lake monster appears on signs, souvenirs, children's books, statues along the water, travel stories, and even sports mascots. The Lake Champlain region describes Champ as present in local life as a celebrated symbol, whether people believe in its existence or not. And the Vermont Lake Monsters baseball team also uses Champ as its mascot. This may sound light, even cheerful, but beneath it lies something very deep about the way human beings live with legends. A legend does not always need to be frightening. It may begin with unease before deep water, but over many generations, it can also become a source of local pride, a story told to visitors, a smile printed on a t-shirt, a green statue looking out over the lake, a familiar name children hear from a very young age. The monster that once belonged to the darkness beneath the water slowly steps onto the shore, living inside the memory of the community. But when a legend becomes friendly, it does not lose all of its depth. On the contrary, it gains many new lives. To a child, Champ may be a lovable creature in a book. To someone working in tourism, Champ is a sign of regional identity. To a folklorist, Champ is an example of how legends transform over time. To a skeptic, Champ is a lesson in blurry photographs, memory, and visual illusion. And to someone standing quietly beside Lake Champlain at sunset, Champ may simply be a feeling that is very difficult to name while gazing into a body of water too wide to fully grasp. Perhaps that is why this legend still lives. It does not force everyone to believe in the same way. It is soft enough for each person to enter through a different door. Those who love mystery can listen to the story of the Mansi photograph. Those who love history can follow the trail of older legends. Those who love science can turn toward geology, biology, the lake sturgeon, visual illusion, and the way human beings process ambiguous information. Those who love a sense of place can see Champ as a character of the Champlain region, strange yet familiar, belonging to the lake itself. In educational centers such as ECHO, Leahy Center for Lake Champlain, Champ is also presented not merely as a rumor, but as a story combining local history legend, science, real creatures, and things that remain unproven. The exhibition, Champ America's Lake Monster, invites viewers into both the mystery and the science of the legend, rather than choosing one side too quickly. That approach is valuable, because if we simply say Champ is real, we have gone far beyond the evidence. If we simply say Champ is completely meaningless, we ignore the way this legend has taken root in the culture of an entire lake region. The truth lies somewhere more delicate. Champ may not have been scientifically confirmed as a real creature, but Champ is certainly real as a story. It is real in the way people talk about Lake Champlain. It is real in the way an old photograph still makes people curious. It is real in the way children look at the water a little longer. It is real in the way a region uses legend to remember that its lake is more than water. And perhaps that is the most enduring form of existence for a lake monster. A creature of flesh and bone, if it existed, would need food habitat, a population biological traces. It would be limited by its body. But a creature in legend can live through many generations, changing shape, while still keeping its old soul. Today, it is a water serpent. Tomorrow, it is a long-necked monster. Later, it becomes a cheerful mascot, then returns again as a vague shadow in a documentary. It does not remain still beneath the lake. It swims through human storytelling. That does not mean legend is false in an empty sense. Legends often begin from feelings that are very real. The fear of deep water is real. The danger of fog, cold ice, strong wind, and a wide lake surface is real. Large creatures beneath the water are real. Glacial history is real. The whale beneath the soil of Vermont is real. The lake sturgeon, a living fossil beneath the water, is real. And among all those truths, the human imagination finds an image to gather them together, a mysterious creature named Champ. Seen this way, Champ is no longer only a biological question. Champ is a name human beings have given to the feeling that Lake Champlain is deeper than what the naked eye can see. The lake has physical depth, but it also has spiritual depth. Beneath the water are layers of fishstone mud and sediment. Beneath the story are layers of indigenous memory settlers, newspapers, tourism, science, skepticism, and dreaming. Champ lives where those layers meet. It does not need to appear clearly every day because that very lack of clarity is its habitat. Imagine a small town beside the lake at the end of summer. The sunlight has softened. Shops near the shore begin to turn on their lights. On a sign, Champ is painted with large eyes and a curling green body. A family walks past, and a child stops to look, asking whether the creature is real. The adult does not answer right away. Perhaps they say, "No one knows for sure." Perhaps they smile and say, "Maybe it's sleeping under the lake." That answer is not a complete scientific lesson, but it is a seed. From that moment, the child will look at the water differently, and many years later, perhaps that same child will tell the story to someone else, not necessarily as a firm belief, perhaps only as a memory. When I was little, I once heard that beneath Lake Champlain, there was a monster named Champ. I once stood on the shore and looked for a very long time, hoping to see a neck rise among the waves. I never saw anything but the feeling. From that moment, still remains. That is how legend continues. It does not need anyone to prove it. It does not need anyone to force it. It travels through memory with the gentleness of a story heard in childhood. In the modern world, where everything is often asked to be clear, measurable, photographable, and verifiable, legends like Champ still have life because they preserve a necessary gray area. Human beings do not live by answers alone. Human beings also live by questions. A good question can carry the imagination very far, making a lake feel deeper, turning an ordinary trip into a small expedition, and giving a quiet evening the whisper of the unknown. Of course, that gray area must be held with honesty. We should not turn Champ into scientific fact without evidence. We should not borrow indigenous legends to claim something those cultural sources themselves do not state in a modern way. We should not turn the lake sturgeon into a monster simply to make the story more dramatic. But we also do not need to drain the soul from the legend by treating it only as a visual mistake. Between those two extremes, there is a more beautiful way of telling the story. Respect the evidence, respect the storytellers, respect the lake, and respect the silence of what cannot yet be concluded. When we do that, Champ becomes a bridge connecting science with imagination, the present with the glacial past, children with elders, visitors with local residents, the lake's surface today with the ancient sea that once existed beneath this land. And no matter where people stand in their belief, they can still meet on that bridge, look down into Lake Champlain, and admit that this place has a very special power. It makes human beings want to tell stories. At the end of the journey, perhaps we do not need to imagine Champ as an animal hiding and waiting to be discovered. Perhaps we can imagine it as a long shadow moving through many layers of time. It glides through the legends of water serpents. It appears briefly in the Mansi photograph. It blends into the ripples that science analyzes. It looks toward the lake sturgeon, the truly ancient creature beneath the water. It swims through museums, books, statues, ball fields, t-shirts, and bedtime stories. It is no longer only beneath the lake. It lives in the way human beings remember the lake. And perhaps that is what makes Champ different from a passing rumor. A weak rumor dies when no new evidence appears, but a strong legend transforms. When it is doubted, it becomes a question. When it is partly explained, it changes its position. When science enters, it does not necessarily die. It can become a richer story, one in which the listener knows how to be skeptical, yet still knows how to wonder. Champ survives because it does not only demand belief, it invites us to look at the water, to look at history, to look at how memory works, to look at how a community chooses a symbol for its land, to look at how a freshwater lake can carry the memory of the sea within it, to look at how a truly ancient fish still moves silently along the bottom, to look at how human beings, even with maps and machines, still stop before a dark body of water and wonder whether there is still something out there. Night falls over Lake Champlain. The distant mountains are now only soft black lines beneath the sky. The last light leaves the surface of the water. Small waves touch the rocky shore, even and gentle, like the breathing of a very large creature asleep. Nothing rises, no new evidence appears, no voice calls from the bottom of the lake. There is only the water, wide, cold, quiet, and full of the stories human beings have placed there across many generations. Perhaps Champ is not a monster swimming beneath Lake Champlain. Perhaps Champ is the feeling the lake leaves in the human mind, the feeling that the world is still deep, that the past has never completely disappeared, that the quietest places sometimes hold the longest questions. And if a legend can make us look at nature with greater humility, listen to history with greater attention, and step closer to the water with a clearer imagination, then perhaps it has lived exactly as it was meant to live. And so, as tonight's story comes to a close, Champ is still there, not necessarily as a proven creature, but as an echo beneath the lake, a name for the gray space between truth and imagination, a symbol of Lake Champlain, where ice once retreated, where the sea once poured in, where whales once swam, where sturgeons still live, where human beings still tell stories, and where the water continues to keep its own silence. And here our journey tonight beside the frozen lake slowly comes to a close. From an old photograph on the surface of Lake Champlain, we have gone deeper into a world where legend and truth are not entirely separate. We have seen the shadow of Champ in the human imagination, listened again to ancient stories of giant water serpents, and then quietly descended beneath the cold water where the past of the Ice Age still rests in the earth, in the stone, in the traces of a region that was once a sea. There the story does not belong only to monsters. It belongs to the beluga whales that once swam through a world that has vanished. It belongs to the lake sturgeon, an ancient creature still alive, still moving silently along the bottom like a memory, with scales, with breath, with a rhythm of its own. And it belongs to us as well, to human beings who have always stood before deep water. With the same ancient question, has this world truly been fully explained? Perhaps Mansi does not give us a certain answer, but that photograph opens a door. Behind that door are glaciers, ancient seas, fossils, legends, science, and the deeply human longing to believe that somewhere beneath the dark water, something still remains unnamed. Yes, if tonight's story made you feel relaxed, curious, or made you want to keep exploring ancient mysteries in this slow and quiet way, please follow the fan page so you will not miss the next journeys. And before you leave, let me know next time which monster lake, mythical creature, or historical mystery would you like to hear about on a quiet night like this?